So welcome everyone. I am excited today to have a very important guest with us, and we are going to be discussing a topic that I know a lot of people are interested in, or the opposite, a lot of people just. So we today are going to be talking about eating disorders, challenging myths and embracing realities. And we have an expert on the topic here today. We have Kira Denny from Pearl Wellness Practice. Welcome, Kira. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes. So a little bit about our conversation today. So I am Megan Mitchell. I'm not going to read my bio for you all, but a little bit about the work that I do. I am a child and adolescent therapist in a private practice in DC. And I specifically focus on mostly school-age children, and I incorporate play and expressive arts into my work. Additionally, I am the founder of Agency Change Social Work Test Prep, which helps prepare social workers for their licensing exams. And then, of course, we have moved into CEUs, which is great. A little bit about some of my interests. I like tech and innovation. Kira and I were just talking about tech and how we use it in our practice. So that's a big point for me, and how mental health professionals can utilize tech and innovation and be really in those conversations versus being told, now you must use these different tech platforms and devices. And then also, if I'm not busy enough, I am a doctoral student at SUNY Buffalo, and there I'm focusing on multicultural supervision, multicultural ethics, and really incorporating multicultural and intersectionality into supervision and consultation. So that's a little bit more coming in the next couple of years as I finish up my doctorate. So that's just a little bit about me. And I will read all about Kira because there's a lot of good stuff here. So Kira is the co-founder and co-owner of Pearl Wellness Practice. She's a licensed clinical supervisor and therapist serving individuals with disordered eating, eating disorders, body image, and general mental health concerns in DC, Maryland, and Florida. In addition to providing direct care, Kira serves as chair-elect for the Washington, D.C. International Association for Eating Disorder Professionals, provides individual and group supervision and consultations for other mental health professionals and practices, facilitates psychoed groups, and contributes her eating disorder leadership and management expertise to blogs and podcasts. So I see there is a tech aspect there. And then she takes a person-centered and CBT approach. She guides others to identify their core beliefs and behaviors and helps them develop and implement skills and techniques that best fit their lifestyle, needs, and wants for personal growth. Then in her spare time, because there's probably very little of that, she volunteers as the philanthropy chair for her alumni, mentoring psychology students, watching or playing sports, and hanging out with family. I love that you included that. I should also include some of my hobbies too, but I also love sports. Do you have a favorite sport that you like to play and watch?
I watch football through and through, whether it's the NFL or college. I do college pick'ems. I do fantasy football. Currently failing at fantasy football this year, but doing pretty well in my college pick'ems. So I feel like it's been a good balance in that. I'll play, anything that anyone is willing to do. Pick up a game of tennis, play the football. I used to be a gymnast, so anytime I can try to get to a open gym night, I'll try to do that. But that's been a little bit harder with, again, the spare time is not as much as it used to be.
Yeah, I huge football fan too, huge University of Michigan fan. Both me and my husband went there, and then also have been doing fantasy forever. Probably about 12 years now. So fall is very football themed in my household.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that fantasy is now on an app. I remember getting together and doing it on paper and yeah. So I do appreciate that. And then in March is March Madness. And so I'll follow that. And then the NBA is back on. So on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays when I don't have football to watch, at least I have basketball.
There you go. So a few kind of housekeeping things before we get into the meat of our conversation. So here are our learning objectives today. Participants will be able to analyze treatment approaches, address misconceptions, and we're going to address diversity in how you treat your clients, and then also evaluate outcomes and collaborative practices. And we're going to touch on all of these things today throughout our conversations, and then a little bit more about why is this topic important. I mean, obviously it's important for a variety of reasons, But I think a big thing here is it can be a very complex condition. So a lot of people, like I said, either are interested in learning more, or on the opposite end, don't work very often with clients that may be presenting with disordered eating. So what's important about this is that clinicians are up to date on the best evidence-based practices, treatment models, and how they can provide high quality care for this population. Cultural sensitivity and inclusivity, that is huge, right? Any mental health field, this is going to come up when you're working with clients. So well, we'll get into this, but I'm going to ask Kira about, is there any particular needs that multicultural clients might face, or that you have to bring into your treatment when working with diverse populations? And then we're going to really talk about this interdisciplinary collaboration and impact, because Kira will talk a little bit more about how she works with a registered dietitian, and often it's a multidisciplinary team that is needed to best serve this population, providing collaboration, continuity of care, and making sure that treatment is smooth and seamless as you work with clients. So without further ado, we will go ahead and jump into the meat of our conversation. So Kira, thank you for being here once again, but tell us a little bit about what you do, what you do on a day-to-day, and how you got into this work.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I co-own a private practice with a registered dietitian for eating disorder treatment within the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And then for myself, I also see Florida clients, and then registered dietitians have a little bit more flexibility in who they can see. So that has been really nice. Unfortunately, as again, a licensed therapist, I can't just get licensed everywhere, but hopefully a compact will be.
Yes.
But yeah, so I mean, that's what I currently do. And so within the practice, I see clients directly. I also provide supervision for, individuals that maybe don't even are looking for eating disorder like specific, but it definitely comes up in supervision conversations. I'll flag something. I'm like, oh, that's, very interesting that your client, did X, Y, and Z. Can you explore that a little bit more? And I would say probably 8 out of 10 times, the more that my supervisee will go back and explore it, there's definitely some underlying disordered eating or potentially a full-blown eating disorder. So there's been that component, as well as my business partner, Eden, who's a registered dietitian. We provide workshops and trainings for private practices in the area, which has been really nice to be able to, again, have that awareness, because that's part of eating disorder treatment, is it's not just the direct care, but also bringing that prevention and awareness to other places and providers who most of the time are probably working with someone who has some type of belief, a diet culture, body image, something that is tied to food and body, even if it's not being explored. So just to have that awareness, which is why we love to do trainings and workshops on that. How I got started with this is actually very interesting, and I love to tell it, because it's one of those where you say you'll never do it, and then you dedicate your whole life to it. I was in my, I guess, 1.5 year of grad school, I guess you could say, and we were having to pick out supervision and supervision placements. And I went to my supervisor and I was like, I'll do anything but eating disorders. And she's like, all right, well, that's fine. You got to find something. And in true procrastination, the only thing left was an eating disorder treatment center. So I was placed there, which I will say the benefit has been huge in that, but one of it was paid. So I definitely was jumped on that as a grad student. If you can get a paid internship, it is ideal. And I know it's also few and far between, but with that, I fell in love with the population. And I know that's so weird to say when you're talking about something so complex and so difficult for some, but in that time, I had an incredible supervisor who I think if I hadn't had such a great supervisor, I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much as I did, who really took the time to, knew that I was very green in this space, and really took the time to educate me, involve me in groups, involve me in individual sessions. I really felt like my grad school supervision placement was huge in cultivating what I do now. Because with that, I stayed with that company from 2016 to 2020 at different capacities, moving from an intern to a therapist to eventually a supervisor to yeah, so which was great. And they have them across like the US. So places I moved, it was kind of nice to keep in touch and be able to have like, okay, there are, this company that I was able to still work for. And so with that, I then decided I really wanted to be really niche in this and dedicate all my time. So I ended up doing a lot more courses, stayed within the community, joined different groups out there, such as the International Association for Eating Disorder Professionals, which is also known as IADEP. And so with that, I would join local chapters wherever I was at if they had them. If not, I reached out and was like, can we build one of these chapters out here? And so when I came to the DMV area, there was a chapter. And so through that, I was able to work with them, and we were able to provide, CEUs, but also just give back to the community, which is great. And that's where I'm the chair elect for that. So that's kind of what I do within the work, and how I got started.
Yeah. And so, like you said, now this is your niche, right?
It is.
How, what age clients do you see? Tell us a little bit. Is it across the board? What do you commonly see as someone that would maybe walk into your office for treatment?
Absolutely. So I see 16 and up. I'm very selective, and I'm fully transparent about that when I see someone that is under the age of 18, because parent involvement is huge when you're working with minors if they don't have the accessibility. I've worked with some 16-year-olds that are sometimes more independent than some of my older clients, and they are doing their grocery shopping. They are very honed in on their recovery, where there are sometimes we do need that parent involvement, but I need that parent investment, because we have to do individual sessions, we have to do family sessions, we have to maybe do a meal support session together as a family of seeing how is the family responding to their child not eating. Do we need to do some education on what to say, what not to say, how to guide, how to be that support in a effective and healthy way. And so again, 16 and up, but selective with 16, but it's also a very pertinent age to work with, because a lot of times they're going off to college and their entire world changes. So if you can kind of get in, it goes back to being, preventative mindset. If we can get in before that eating disorder or those changes happen, we can plan for that. Of like, hey, you're going off to college, you now have maybe, more access to food than you thought you did, or maybe you actually don't have access to food, right? There's also the different things like that of food insensitivity that we have to think of too. And so, again, 16 and up, I'll work with all eating disorders, from a variety of anorexia, binge eating, bulimia, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is also known as ARFID. I feel like, there's a bunch out there, but I would say those are the common ones that I definitely see. I work with atypical, and then some other ones that are kind of around but are maybe not as much talked about is orthorexia, which is the idea of like clean eating or more organic or certain like nutrients that they don't want to eat and things like that. And so definitely a variety that I see, but with the population I work with being mainly young adults, college age, it is that restrictive or binge that I am seeing a lot. And all eating disorders are from a place of restriction. So we have to be aware of that, they're saying, I'm binging, but okay, but are you restricting? What are you restricting? What are you not allowing yourself to have? And that's always a fun moment when a client's like, wait, I have been restricting. I didn't realize that tied into what I'm doing now. I work with athletes as well. For a little bit of my time in like right before the pandemic, I worked for a group practice out in Indiana that had a kind of partnership with Indiana University. So I got to see a lot of the athletes there, which was really interesting. Definitely a goal of mine is to kind of build that part of it in knowledge and being able to treat that and get involved in colleges with collegiate athletes, because I think that's a huge place, because a lot of times, again, they're going from maybe a setting of doing sports where they have a huge support system of family, friends, they've maybe been doing this in their community for so long, they have this huge community, they go off to college, their community shrinks, and all they now have is maybe some dorm mates, some friends and coaches, but they're also having to make that transition of college at the same time. And so we can see a lot of controlling behaviors come out in that.
And just the level that's expected of performance once you get to the collegiate level, it's very, very, very different than what you would see at the high school level. Even if they were very competitive at the high school level, it's just very, very different culture,
Absolutely.
expectations, a lot of different things. So I think that would be like awesome if you could move into that space. I don't know, but I assume it would probably be much needed.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, especially like you said, right? Like it changes in terms of the their, I can't even think of the word right now, but what is required of them. They're also doing interviews, right? There a lot of times you don't even see that part of, like, they maybe never did that at the high school
Ah,
level. Now we're also working not on like maybe some eating disorder stuff, but just confidence of being in front of a reporter and having to say things and knowing that things can be, taken out of context, or that you are now out there in the media, which can be huge. Or people are commenting on like, oh, well, last week they looked, X, Y, and Z, but this week they look this way. And so really also looking at it, which I know we're probably going to talk about social media in a little bit too, but the impact that social media has, both negatively and positively, but definitely being preventative when it comes to media.
and they're under a microscope often, right? It's like they definitely are out there either on campus or on social media or nationwide, right? Depending on the level that they're playing at. So the pressures of that, of I can't imagine when I was 18, 19 years old having that pressure. So it's very I can see why it would be very challenging time to manage that, plus being a student at the same time. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a lot to manage. So yeah.
Yeah.
Question for you. So you started this work almost what, eight-ish years ago?
Yeah.
What have you seen changed in your time? Like, have things differed? Have different protocols changed? Are there any trends that have differed? And how does the pandemic tie into that?
It's a very loaded question.
There's a lot there.
There's definitely a lot there. Pandemic had a huge impact on it. I would say that ties into social media and also just the messaging that was being presented to individuals of getting outside, exercising, which is great, right? Like we do want to see movement, but we want to see that in a mindful way and not as a way of like a means to manipulate body. And in
Yeah.
the way that the messaging was throughout the pandemic was like, oh, don't be a slog, don't just sit on the couch, you need to get out. And that's a lot of pressure when we're also going through a, world pandemic of not even knowing what emotions are coming up. Are we going to have a job when we wake up the next day? Like so many things are happening. And then we can control food and we can control exercise. And that was the biggest thing that I definitely saw increase was I have either all this time now because I'm unfortunately laid off, or I am feeling pressure that I have to do this because I'm not getting out. I'm not, making my normal commute to work. I'm not back, doing activities, that maybe you did that and, had just mindful movement in general. So that was huge. I definitely saw a huge increase when it came to young men and women, I would say, high school age, with a lot of the TikTok trends and videos that are out there, such as like what I eat in a day, or these are like what I did to lose weight. And again, it's so arbitrary because everybody is different and everybody responds to things differently. What works for one person is not going to work for the next. And also, again, we want to get back to the mindset of exercising because we want to and we like it and we find like, mental clarity with it, but not because we feel like we have to, or that it, we need to change in weight or size.
And there was so much focus on people are getting so sedentary, they're gaining weight. Like I feel like on the news every day, it was like the longer we got into it and people were not having access to gyms or access to the food they might have been able to have access to before, it was like all these stats about how people are gaining on average 5 to 10 pounds. And it felt like that's just what you heard so often in the segments that you would hear on the news. And people were glued to the news because that's like one of the only ways that information was coming out. So I
Yeah,
think there was just a lot of messaging coming out across the board during that time as well.
absolutely. And they did talk about just mental health in general of what can happen when your life just changes so suddenly and routine. But again, I think that they monopolized on that and exploited exercise and food with it.
What do you think are some misconceptions people might have about eating disorders, and what do you see come up that, people have these myths or these ideas that they've heard or are perpetuated over time? So what are some that you commonly see or hear that you kind of have to educate on or dismantle?
Yeah. So one of my mottos is all foods fit within balance, variety, and moderation. And many people have a myth that that can't be true. And it really goes back to the three things again of moderation, variety, and balance, right? In the same way that you can't have a salad for every meal, you're not going to get the nutrients you need. You also can't do that with maybe foods that don't have nutrients that, and I think that's one of it. There's the myth of like healthy, good versus bad food. I think dismantling that is a huge thing of, again, all foods have to fit, right? Like if you want that donut, you can have it. We're just not going to have it for every meal and snack and breakfast and dinner. And that's fine. But that goes back to, are you allowing other foods in? Because if you're not, that is where those binges can happen, where those beliefs, that mental belief of, oh, I can't have that food or I shouldn't have that food. So I'd say that's definitely a myth out there. Another one is that, not everyone can get an eating disorder. That's completely untrue. Anyone can. Any demographic, any socioeconomic status, any age, gender, anybody can. And I think, unfortunately, in the past, especially within TV shows and movies, if you think about the comments or messaging, it was always geared towards women. And we're slowly progressing a little bit to see some, in the media, some changes in that, not at the rate I would like it to be. But I would say that's a huge thing, is that there's this idea of it's, tall, thin women have anorexia, when someone in a larger body could absolutely be restricting and you have no idea. But because we have these horrible beliefs that people in larger bodies can't, or that, they must be eating, that's just messed up. So that's a big myth there. Other myths that I definitely have had clients, come to me is, I had it when I was younger. I think that's a big one, right? Is like, oh, that was just something when I was younger. But when we really peel it back, it's like, yes, you did have it when you were younger, but that was a response to maybe a stressful situation, or a response to, the culture that you were in or the environment that you're in. What happens if, in 10 years you're in that same space, whether that be a financial stressor or family stressor or work stressor, academic, whatever it may be. It's really about identifying stressors. A lot of times clients will say, oh, that's in the past, especially when I have clients that come to me that are like, oh, I just want to work on like, maybe this work thing. And then in my intake, which is probably very different than many mental health intakes, is I do even if they're coming for general, I go deep into, what is your relationship with food and body? Tell me about your eating habits. Tell me, when was the last time you ate, even today? Like, especially, if I see a client at 4 o'clock, I'll ask them, when was the last time you ate today? And it is very surprising, the answers I get, of like, oh, I ate at like 1 today. Was that your only meal today? Yes. Okay. Well, why is that? And that's not to say, that sometimes we are busy, right? Like, not everyone has an eating disorder, but also recognizing anyone can have disordered eating or eating disorder. And so I would say those are the biggest myths that I see.
Kind of something that popped into my mind when you were saying that. How often do you see that your clients maybe grew up in a household or had this kind of culture of, this is how things work in your family? Because like a lot of times when you're younger, you eat what is served to you. So how much does the family or home environment usually play into how things progress throughout the lifespan?
Yeah, it can be a huge impact. I mean, I don't think I have any qualitative number around that, but it's huge, right? Especially when I start talking to clients about, what are the food beliefs we have? What are the beliefs that you have about your body? And then we start to hear, and, they talk about how maybe their dad would talk about exercise, or they heard their mom say, I don't look good today, or I don't want to be in the picture. Oh, I didn't eat today. This is my first meal of the day. Like comments like that we don't even recognize have so much pun intended, weight with it of what comes with that. Research has shown that individuals as young as the age of 3 can have body image concerns and issues,
Mhm.
which is, if you think about that, is a very huge developmental age, which I know with the population you work with, you're fully aware of this, is that that's when they're taking in information. They may not develop anything until like 7 or 8, but they started taking in that information so young, hearing those comments, or, oh, you need to eat your vegetables before you can have dessert. Which again, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to that too much. But I also, when I'm working with parents, when I did work with younger ages, is that all foods have to fit. Maybe your child, yes, obviously, I'm not saying let your child have dessert every single time before dinner, but if that's what they're needing in that moment, children are so intuitive. And I think that's the thing, is that changes in our development, is being intuitive, because we have all these messaging, all these things that we're told that we should or shouldn't do, and we no longer trust ourselves.
And like you said, I work with the younger ones, and I see it not explicitly like a parent coming in and saying, I think my child has issues with food, but there'll be very interesting interactions I see, right? Like we have snacks that we offer their children. They come from school or they're coming from activities. And it's just interesting to see different reactions from parents. Sure, go pick out your snack, or no, you just ate dinner, you can't have a snack. And then sometimes there's some frustration between either the parent or the kid, that they now are like embarrassed because I heard the parent say that, oh, you can't have, and it's Halloween, so we have a little bowl of candy, right? And
Yeah.
can I have a piece? I don't know if my parent will let me have a piece. So I see it even play out that way, right? Of it's definitely a point of discussion in many families,
Yeah.
when you can have access to snacks, when you can't have access. And I'm thinking I've had kids as young as 4 or 5 use phrases like I'm fat, or my friend is fat, or that
Mhm.
person is skinny. And we see it even in toys in the playroom, right? Like even messaging that way, that certain dolls look certain ways, or certain characters are perceived as certain things. So I think it's just part of westernized culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think, did I answer all the questions that you had around? Okay.
I think so. So we talked a little bit about how family beliefs, values can definitely play into things. How do question, you work with 16 and up, so you're starting to be, a little bit teens to younger adults. Let's talk about social media. What's going on with social media? It's very different than even when I was on social media, which was MySpace many, many, many years ago. But
Because you had to worry about who was your top 8.
yes, or AIM Messenger way back when, but there's been iterations of social media in some way, shape, or form. But it's much more accessible, is what I see now. So how do you think that these trends, or teens and then younger, even younger adults and adults,
Oh yeah,
are impacted or influenced by social media?
absolutely. Yeah, the amount of times that I've had someone come in and say, I saw on TikTok, I think I need like a tracker. I think if I hit like a certain number, I
Yeah.
should reward myself. It is crazy. Um, yeah, I mean, social media again has such a huge impact, and it can be positive. And I think that's the thing, is that one thing that I am very happy to hear, that Instagram and TikTok and Pinterest, all 3 of them now have a feature where you can go in and you can put in keywords that you don't want to see. And so that's one thing when I'm working with clients on preventative plans, or even like a relapse prevention plan, is let's declutter social media. Who are you currently following? Why are you following them? What's the intention? Do you have maybe a family member that's posting things that are a little bit, difficult in your recovery to see? Let's mute them. I know that sounds harsh, but this is about you and your recovery, and that's not going to help it. And so those are definitely some ways that we can do it. And then for myself, and our practice is, we do have an Instagram, and we are very intentional about the things that we post. And we ensure that the stuff that we're posting is aligned with what we do. And I do that in the same in my personal. And there are definitely times that I see things that I'm like, you know what, I want to mute this. I don't want to see it. I don't want it in my algorithm. And I think that's the biggest thing, is it's all about algorithm, going back to technology. And so if you can, go in there. What are some words that can be triggering for you? Is it weight loss? Is it, the weight loss transformation? Those videos I cannot stand. I cannot stand the before and after. And a lot of times, the ads that come up too, right? Like
Targeted for like weight loss supplements
yes.
and do you need meal delivery and join this fitness revolution type thing? Yes.
Yeah. And so, we go through that of like, okay, you like when an ad comes up, go in there and say you don't want to see it. It takes, 2 seconds. So those features have been really helpful and beneficial in that regard. But again, it can be very, very tricky, especially when you have, again, the accessibility of social media has exploded. I think about, younger kids that I used to work with, and I'm like, why do you have a phone? Like, you don't need it right now. But also, why do you have access to all these things? And so I think that's the thing, is when I'm working with parents, is also wanting them to create space that their child can come to them and be like, hey, I saw that this was really triggering. Can you help me kind of just like process this in the moment? And so having those conversations of what that looks like, of, we don't want to completely do the all or nothing of completely shutting them off from it, because if we do that, when they go out into, that's where, again, where that preventative at the age of 16 before college, we can try to be aware of things that are going to come up. I think about students that are worried about, freshman 15. It's like, why is that messaging even still around? I mean, I remember that when I went to college being something. I remember, my family talking about that being something that was said. And so I would say that's a huge part of it too, is really that preventative. But with social media, it's a lot of decluttering and replenishing, and let's find accounts that are going to be, more beneficial. Or maybe we're not on it during recovery right now, especially in those first, couple of months. I will sometimes ask clients, what would it be like if we completely got rid of social media? And again, we don't want to get into the all or nothing, but let's slowly and bring it back in. Okay, we've gone 2 months without it. Now let's download it in session again. How are you feeling right now? What's coming up? And there's a lot of anxiety that comes up with it. There's a lot of comparison that happens. I know I have clients that get anxious with all the different features where you can, share stories and people can post you and things like that. Is they're like, well, I don't want to be posted because then I don't want to see myself. But, and so I'll do a lot of exposure therapy of, let's go through your Instagram or your Facebook or something that your friend just posted of you. Tell me what's coming up. And so, I really look at it from that objective of, tell me about that day. What were you guys doing that day? Where were you at? You're out of quarantine, especially with it being fall. I actually just did this with a client a couple of weeks ago. They went to Massachusetts for kind of the Salem stuff. And they're talking about the anxiety they were going to have on the trip about photos being taken. And I was like, that's unfortunate that you're going to do something that you've talked about the last couple of years that we've been working together, that you want to go do, and this is what you're concerned about. And of course, in no way am I invalidating that, but let's really look at the reality of, you are not allowing yourself to really embrace and enjoy something that you've talked about again for 2 years because of this. And so that's when we're like, okay, this is unhealthy, right?
Yes.
What makes it unhealthy? It's the fact that it's bringing you anxiety. Okay. Can you have that conversation with your friend before you go, like, hey, I don't really want photos. I'm, working on this right now. If we post photos, just don't tag me. You can say that, advocating for yourself. It doesn't mean in 6 months that you won't feel better about maybe a post, but if you don't, that's okay. You don't have to. I think a lot of times, especially, people do so much comparison of their life in social media. I think about all the videos that came out, especially during the pandemic, of like what I do in a day. And it's like, realistically, no one is probably doing that every day. It's not sustainable. It's not attainable. Maybe you do that here and there, but I think that's another big piece of it, is pointing out comparisons that are coming up and the logic versus emotional that comes up with it.
And I'm glad you talked about like the psychoeducation piece, especially you work with teens, so they have a little bit more understanding of that. But some of these tweens and younger children, I mean, there's kiddos as young as 7, 8, 9 on social media. And I try to tell parents, developmentally, is that appropriate? Why or why not? Right? I don't tell them yes or no, your kid. That's a personal decision that they make. But developmentally, are they able to understand in its essence what social media even is and how there's algorithms? And that I tell some kiddos, right, that's a paid person who's getting money to promote this to you, right? Like, and we don't know if this is what their actual life is. We have no idea. We don't know them personally, right? We've never had a conversation with them. And we don't know if there's filters on their account or what, if they're manipulating these images. And I just think for anyone out there that it works with anyone of any age, having those conversations with whoever it is about really digital literacy, right? Like, do you understand the pros and cons? And I agree. I think there's some really great things. Like, I've had some kids that actually follow accounts that maybe they were diagnosed with ADHD and they follow someone, and that makes them feel very validated. So there's always positives and negatives, and that's what I like to tell my clients and parents is when the negatives are outweighing the positives, that's time that maybe we need to take a break or cut back or something. So we're not saying like, delete all of your accounts and social media is terrible. I have social media, right? I don't know many people who don't have social media, but what benefit is it giving you and what harm is it bringing to you is the question I always like to ask my clients.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge question of, I like how you worded that. What's the benefit and what's the harm?
Yeah. And especially if they're like, this person is posting these terrible things about me on social media. And I said, okay. And I know you're probably going to have FOMO because you like to just see it. But what if you didn't? Well, I probably feel better. I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave it up to you if you delete this person or block this person. But like, kind of just going through that thought exercise with them that is this adding or is it subtracting from your overall wellness?
Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing too, is also even when you even ask that question, how they respond, like you said, is there a fear of missing out? And if that's the case, what is the actual fear? Is it the fear that someone's perceiving you a certain way? Is it like, right? Like, is it truly the fear of missing out? Or is it these ideas of perceptions that someone has? Or are you getting anxious because it's like, oh, well, I don't know what they're doing. And what if I'm not measuring up to like what they're doing? And so really, I think with that FOMO being such a thing, I know that again is a word I hear all the time with clients, is what is the actual fear? Is it that like, did you really want to go to that event? Because when we talk about it, we like digest it a little bit more. I don't know if you truly wanted to go.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's totally fine. You don't have to. But why are you not? So
And talking sometimes about the addictive nature of it, right? Like once we start doing it, it's a behavior, it's a pattern, right? It's like how much for me, I even have had to put different I put different blockers on during work hours, right? Because I can get caught up in the pattern of just, and then 40 minutes go by and I'm like, what? I could have been doing a million other things. So it has very addictive properties. And I just think it's important that everyone is aware of how it's having an impact on their life.
Definitely.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I know this is something that's important to you. And of course, I am studying this a little bit more. So let's talk about different demographics and how do you interface with clients that might identify as BIPOC or LGBTQ plus or from a minority population, and how does that affect how you treat them and how they might even seek treatment?
Yeah. So one question with that I always ask is being very, culture competent of like, what does your family think about mental health? What does your family's relationship with food and body look like? It's not just you, especially when we think about, again, it is a complex and it's not just nuclear. There is so many components. It's many layers. And so I really ask those types of questions, are there any spiritual or religious things that play a role in it? I have clients that celebrate certain religions where they have to fast, but if we're in a recovery, what does that look like, and how can we honor your beliefs and your culture while also your recovery, and having those conversations, being plugged in terms of recognizing that things are changing within those different communities and being on top of it, taking my own trainings so that I can be well versed on it, and also connecting with other individuals that may be a part of those different communities, that even though they don't have eating disorders, I can go ask them what kind of comes up in this. They don't have to be eating disorder experts, but I can take their knowledge of that background to be like, okay, I can now better serve my client. And there are times where I'm not going to be the best fit, and being able to refer out and knowing that is okay, right? Like, we are not able to service every single person that comes through our door as much as I would love to every time. I know that I can't. And again, it goes back to best for the client. Um, so I
Absolutely.
think that's a huge component, is having that respect for self and respect for the client, that you can say no and it's okay. Maybe it is a bridge type session where, like, you don't want to leave them without care, and so you have to kind of bridge it, but you're not doing the work. You're just kind of being that sounding board until they can get to someone who can really dig into, someone with that background, and things like that. So really being aware of that, of what are your limitations, and are you recognizing them, because you can do more harm if you don't.
And I wonder, just things keep popping into my head as you're talking.
Yeah.
How much do you find that you kind of have to process your own stuff? Because as I could imagine that my own way that I was brought up and the way that I interact in the world around food might come up. If someone, I was raised in an Italian family, so food is like the center of everything. And it's in a lot of ways, it can be forced on people. So like, I can imagine like some of my own stuff coming up as you're working with clients. Do you see that? And of course, obviously having people that you can process that with, but I would imagine for practitioners, stuff is going to come up.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely had clients that have asked me, "Did you have an eating disorder?" Right? Because I think a lot of times with
Yeah.
eating disorders, it is a very secretive. It thrives in shame, and they a lot of times can feel very invalidated and isolated. And I don't always share what my journey is with food and relationship, but with some individuals, it is helpful. And I think it goes back to, is this in the best interest of the client, and what they know. And also asking, why is that important to you? What
Yes.
about my journey helps you or doesn't? Because I could tell you mine, but again, what mine is and what my therapy and things look like is completely different than what we're gonna do for you. Um, but that's not to say that someone that didn't have disordered eating or body image stuff can't be a eating disorder
Right.
specialist, but also recognizing, again, what are the limitations, and where do you have to refer out. But I think that's a huge thing, is recognizing, especially when I hear, maybe similar things, which I know you and I had talked previously, that I used to be a gymnast. So within that creative arts, there is a lot of body manipulation, what is expected. And then so yeah, I mean, I have no problem sharing that there's definitely some food and body things that came up for me. But just because I work with another gymnast or another dancer, it doesn't mean that their journey is the same as what mine is. But I can definitely, be like, oh, okay, yeah, your coach is saying something like that, but this is how we can maybe attack, challenge it, or attack it, or advocate for self, because I do have that experience. But that's not to say that my experience in any way negates or validates what you did and how you're doing it. I think that's a huge piece of it, is, there are gonna be times I'll definitely had clients where a coach made a comment that was very similar to a comment that I had heard as a kid. And definitely internally I was screaming like, oh my gosh, no. And I was like, hey, this isn't about me at this moment. Like, right now
Yes.
at this point,
Yes.
how can we train you to advocate for yourself and really feel confident enough to bring this up? And so, like, we worked on that piece of it. What's the fear of bringing this up with the coach? What's the fear of saying, like, hey, that comment really was negative, it didn't help, it actually put me in more of a mental. So that's a huge thing within creative arts, or some, I mean, with any sports, is there, it's so much more mental. Yes, obviously skill, and I'm fully aware of that, but the mental part of sports and athleticism is huge. And if we're not challenging that, you're not going to be able to do the skills. Because if you're constantly thinking about, oh, what am I going to eat after this training session with my coach, or after this, whatever it may be, you're not even there to focus on why you're there and that you enjoy this sport, or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a sport, but I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah. And I can see how intersectionality would come in here, right? Because culture is more than just, an ethnic culture, right? There's culture of athletics. There's culture of college. There's so many different aspects that come into play that could be present for different clients. So I like that you really just meet them where they're at and honoring where they're at, right? Like what we might think might be very prevalent for them might not be, right? Or something we don't think comes up. Like sometimes I'm shocked that I'm like, oh, wow, okay, glad I asked about that. And
Mhm.
I like to say this approach with curiosity, right? Like, tell me a little bit more about why this is important to you. And I will say, like, the biggest thing is a lot of practitioners were scared to broach some of those topics, and that actually hurts the therapeutic relationship if we're not approaching with curiosity and thinking, well, I don't want to ask that because I might cause more harm. But there's ways you can do it in which you are really being with the client versus, getting your paper out and asking, did I check the boxes that I asked XYZ to the client?
Absolutely. I think the big thing with that is I I really encourage clients to recognize they are the expert of their life. They're meeting with me for 1 hour a week. I'm the expert in that 1 hour for that one issue. But you are the expert of your whole life. So you tell me, what do you need? What is coming up? How do you want to approach this? I can give you guidance and ideas, but maybe that's not going to work. So I think, again, putting the power back to them, because especially with eating disorders, it is about power. And
Yes.
and so let's take that power and control that's needed in a healthy and effective way. And let's
Yes.
dismantle how it's been unhelpful.
Um, one more question following up that, and then I do want to definitely end with an interdisciplinary approach.
Yeah.
There is this stereotype that eating disorders, it's generally what, middle and upper class white women. How do you support clients that are, if a male comes into your office or someone that is living in a bigger body, and like, how do we even give information to the general public that this affects everyone? And I could see that those people that are maybe part of not, mainstream identity might feel like, oh, I can't get help because this isn't for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I always appreciate when they just come, because I think that's the first step, is that identification of I need support, and maybe they have no one. And if my practice or other individuals that they're working with is their only support, let's build your support out. Who can we get you involved with? Are there groups? I mean, there's so many great nonprofits out there that run groups that I have had great conversations with the facilitators to ensure that it is going to be effective. And I recommend, I'm only an hour of your life, maybe once a week. Let's get you plugged in. There's, again, I think groups within, especially any type of recovery or grief, is huge. And so I always encourage that. That's another thing which I didn't mention is with our practice, we knew that the need was there for groups. And so every quarter we run some type of group. We actually have a group starting at the end of November to talk about navigating the holidays.
Yes.
Because that can be a huge trigger for individuals, whether they have an eating disorder or not, because we
Right.
don't even recognize the type of comments that are happening. But yeah, I mean, really identifying who is your support. If you have no support, let's get you plugged in.
Get you.
So that's where on my end, what I do to keep myself kind of I guess fresh on what's there is connecting. I'll reach out to just practices I see. I know nothing about them, but I'm like, hey, can we hop on a call? I want to hear what you're offering. I want to know what you're doing. How can we collaborate and be beneficial referrals to one another and supportive for this community? Also, if they're open, let's do a family session. It doesn't have to be a family session about everything that's ever happened within the family, but let's do a family session about how they can support you, or a loved one, or a partner, or you have maybe a really good friend or a teacher or something. Like, who can we bring in to this? Again, it really is, which goes, I think, to the thing we're going to talk about in a little bit, is the interdisciplinary, right? Of who can be that support. And then again, I'm always looking for CEUs, webinars, offerings to keep myself just up to date on what's out there, because I don't know everything and things are changing. I don't work with every background and population, and I know that, and I want to be able to, if that person comes across, how can I support them if they do? If there's, somebody from a different religious background that I've never even worked with. So I think that's a huge component, is for myself and holding myself accountable, of being plugged in and involved in trainings and people of like peer supervision that, you can always learn. I think that's the thing, is you're never not learning.
You're always learning. And I think in our field, that's so much the case, just by the sheer differences of just humans that we meet and like their own experiences. I learn something new every single day that I work with someone, or it's every time, even from week to week. I could have been working with this person for 2 years, and every single session I learned something new.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So you were talking about the interdisciplinary support. Due to the nature of eating disorders, how important is it that someone that is struggling with this is part of a team that is kind of helping? You said you work with a registered dietitian, but how do you ensure continuity of care, and how important is continuity of care within this subset of the population?
Yeah. I think it goes back to the individual, right? Where are they at in their recovery? I have clients that come in, again, general mental health. We're talking more. You have an eating disorder. We need to get you a dietitian. We need to get you with a health at every size, primary care doctor to get some blood work. We need to maybe incorporate a psychiatrist. And again, and that's again one type of client. Then I have clients who are coming from, that have been referred to me by their doctor because their doctors noticed something. Okay, sign a release of information. I'd like to talk to your doctor. I want to know, one, their understanding of eating disorders, if this is an eating disorder, because if not, how are they gonna help you in this journey, right? So I think that's another thing. And really, interdisciplinary teams is so much more than just providers. Again, it is coaches, it is teachers, it is who are you spending your time with? Is there someone at work that can be involved, that you have to take a break to eat? Who do we need to, do I need to write a letter? Do I need to have a conversation with them? Are you comfortable with me advocating for you? It is so much beyond just, licensed providers, I guess is how I would say it. And I keep that continuity in terms of, again, getting that release of information, having that initial within the first 2 weeks of, contacting their current providers or getting them plugged in with providers if they need that additional. And then follow up. I think that's the biggest thing, is a lot of times we do that initial contact and then we don't follow up. And that's not helpful for anyone, right? Like the dietitian or the doctor or whoever else is maybe telling them one thing, but we're not communicating. Communication is such a huge thing, and especially with eating disorders, because the eating disorder likes to trick the eating disorder brain likes to trick, the client as a whole. And so the eating disorder brain might be telling me one thing, but then telling their registered dietitian another. And so if we're not communicating and we don't know what's happening, we're treating two different people at that point.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds crazy, but that's what you're doing. You're treating two different entities of something that is one whole complex issue. Continuity, and again, while I have a in-house registered dietitian and we work great together, we also refer out. We recognize that you might work great with the dietitian, but not with me. So let's find you a therapist. And then again, that goes from just building those connections and networking and being involved and plugged in different eating disorder spaces, and going out there to spaces that aren't within the eating disorder. I mean, I think that's another thing, is you can't just cater to those with eating disorder specialties. You have to cater to those that either know nothing, know some, or want to know more.
I love that you said it's not just the licensed professionals, because that's something that I hadn't even thought about. Like, it makes complete sense, but if they're in a workforce, do you need to talk to HR? Do you need to get an accommodation at work, that type of thing? So I love that you said that. And I could see that there's probably a need to just do general psychoeducation with coaches, with HR providers, because it can be a taboo subject at times. People don't want to ask about it, or, oh, I don't want to talk about that. But people need to know just the general gist of what's going on, so that, because I can probably be assured that at some point in our life, we have encountered someone that is struggling with this, whether we knew it or not.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some general knowledge of how you can support someone that's going through this.
Yeah, especially within the workforce, right? You're noticing that your employee is late every morning. Why are they late every morning? Are they over exercising because they had to get that extra 2 miles in? We're noticing they're more maybe sluggish at the end of the day. Is it because they're not getting nutrients, they're not taking those lunches? And so I've definitely written accommodation letters in that space. I've also written it for academics when clients are in school, and I have a couple of clients that have gone through law school, and those classes are long. They're there all day. You need to eat. I don't care if your professor says you can't eat in class. Right. This is in the same way that there is disability and accessibility. This is also that. And I think that's the thing, is that eating disorders while they are mental health and mental health is health, eating disorders are also medical. And I think that's a huge thing that gets missed, is that it is not just mental health.
Yeah, I wrote treating the whole patient is what I wrote, because your brain is one part of the equation, right? We live in bodies, and like you said, that you got to really work with, we live in bodies, right? But then we live in systems too. There's people around us. So we really have to take that into account when we are treating really anyone in any space. So our time is wrapping up, but I do want to just kind of leave you with one last question. If a provider's interested and maybe they're just like getting their feet wet, what are just some ways that they could learn a little bit more? What is there any like resources or podcasts, or how can they get good knowledge, good information if you're just really trying to dabble with this and you're brand new?
Yeah. I would say the Alliance for Eating Disorders has a tab for like providers to just kind of get general. They always run like webinars or sometimes CEU events, as well as local International Association of Eating Disorder provider events. I also, provide consultation. So anyone that's ever interested in just wanting to know, like, does my client, maybe they mentioned this, doing a consultation with an eating disorder consultant. As well as some books that I recommend is, Health at Every Size. Intuitive Eating is another one. Life Without Ed, it's a memoir, but it is very much more for a client, but I think it also gives a lot of information for providers that don't have that knowledge of knowing how does a brain work within the eating disorder, because it is two separate brains. Essentially, you have your eating disorder brain and then you have the client's brain. And so being really aware of that. And then, maybe there's trauma on top of that, right? Do we have a trauma brain too? So there's a lot of components.
Right? It's
absolutely.
It's never as simple. Like I think of so often clients come in with one, like the intake says one thing, right? And then it's like, whoa, we just opened 6 stores and we're somewhere completely different. But that's the nature of being a human being, is we're complex beings that have different parts.
Absolutely. And then another resource is, if you have any local eating disorder treatment centers, getting connected with them, seeing what CEUs or webinars they offer. A lot of times, treatment centers will be running some that are free to the community. So I'd say that's another way to get plugged in.
Awesome. I'm thinking, even like my mind, I'm like, I need to reach out to some people and just like have like little chat with them, right? Like people want, in any niche of things, people want to talk about it, right? So I think you left so many good resources. I'll link those different things too, so people can check out some of that information. But I'm sure we could talk about this all day, every day, right? There's never enough time, but I really, really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And I think it's so important for any provider, even if you're not specializing in this, to have knowledge, at least some base knowledge about, or know, what do I do if I don't know, right? Like, who do I reach out to, and how can I get some expertise and some expert opinion in this area? So thank you so much, Kira, for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. And I linked just some articles if people are interested that are very current, right? Because research is always evolving about some different eating disorders, some DS5 criteria stuff, and risk factors. So if anyone's interested in there, they can also check it out. But once again, thank you for joining us, Kira. And I hope that we can pick your brain again soon in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Social Work CE from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post-test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our Unlimited plan. You'll get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses and bringing on new experts. Did I mention we also have 5 free CEU credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.